Let's talk to Sir Geoffrey Nice about this, barrister who led the prosecution of former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic for war crimes at the International Criminal Tribunal. Sir Geoffrey, great to have you on the programme this afternoon. A really major moment in the course of the conflict, at least in theory. In practice, Israel doesn't abide by the International Criminal Court. It doesn't recognise its jurisdiction. What do you expect this might mean in practice? Afternoon.
First of all, the evidence on which Mr. Khan, the prosecutor, relies will be laid before the judges. They'll then have to decide if the evidence is indeed sufficient to justify the issue of an arrest warrant. If arrest warrants are issued for any or all of the 5 people named, then they will become public and almost certainly become public. They don't have to be, but they probably will be. And then those 5 people will know that they either should be handed over to the International Criminal Court by the countries in which they are living, or alternatively, that if they go to any countries that are states parties of the court, those countries will be obliged to hand them over. Thus, as a minimum, if warrants are issued against individuals, those individuals will find their freedom of movement much restricted.
So, and that includes countries like ours that do recognise the ICC and the US, I believe, Sir Geoffrey?
The US does not recognise the
Right, so if Netanyahu tried to come here for a meeting with Rishi Sunak, the UK government, if this goes ahead, and if that warrant is issued, would basically face an obligation to arrest him?
Probably. He might be able to claim, although probably shouldn't, but he might try and claim head of state immunity if he was still in some way head of state, or he's not head of state, he's prime minister, but he might try and claim immunity. But that apart, he'd have to be handed over. And the problem for a country like ours, which has been a great supporter of Israel over the years, is that very support would make it politically very difficult for it to refuse to hand him over, because the allegations will be made you're just continuing preference for one nation over another. So yes, in theory, he'd have to be handed over. And I think it would be a very unwise prime minister or foreign secretary who would say otherwise. It is worth remembering, by the way, that when the ICC came into being, the Labour Party's then Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, said infamously that the court was not intended for people like presidents and prime ministers. I have no idea why he said anything quite so stupid and out of touch with already prevailing sentiments of the public at large. But that's that sentiment that leaders are free. No, that's history. If leaders are charged, they've got to be pursued.
And this could end up in the ICC. Let's talk, if we could, Sir Geoffrey, about another court, the Court of Public Opinion. How damaging is it for a country that would describe itself as a liberal democracy to be led by somebody who is being accused by the prosecutor of the ICC for war crimes? And would you expect it to change the position of the UK government, the US government and other allies of Israel towards the leadership of that country right now?
2 separate questions. Internally, it might have very little effect. After all, the warrants issued against Putin have not necessarily had much effect on whatever level of support he has. Externally, yes, it's bound to have an influence. And countries might find themselves internally in their private discussions wishing they didn't have to support the issue of the warrants. But for the reasons I've already given, it would be a very brave country that would say, we think politics should trump, and I don't use that word in a sort of silly way, but should trump the interests of justice, because they would probably recognize today, I may be proved to be wrong when Sunak comes out and says something different, but I think they would be very unwise to say that the public wish, as so clearly expressed, and as against both sides, not just against Israel and against Hamas, the public wish for people to be brought to account is not something they should be seen to be dismissing on the basis that politics is more important than the law.
And there's a second way, isn't there, that this puts the UK in a difficult position, because on the one hand, you've got our government saying they have no legal evidence to suggest that Israel has committed war crimes. You've now got the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, no less, taking a very different position. I mean, should we expect the UK government's position on the legality or otherwise of Israel's actions to shift in the wake of this, do you think?
There's a slight gap between the positions you describe. At the moment, there's a presentation of evidence to the judges. So it's only the prosecutor's apparent opinion as revealed by his submission of those arrest warrants.
Yep.
If the warrants are granted, then we move to a higher level, as it were, of determination, namely the judges finding that there's a case to justify an arrest warrant. But these things do move incrementally, and we must be very careful not to say there is evidence that they have committed war crimes. What we need to say at the moment is that there is evidence that the prosecutor believes is sufficient for him to ask for a warrant. If he gets the warrant, the next stage is, against whomever they are issued, the evidence has now satisfied judges that there may be crimes committed and so on.
But the prosecutor's clearly seen evidence that he thinks war crimes have committed. The UK government insists they haven't, or they haven't seen any evidence. So, Geoffrey, great to have you on the program.